today?
Today, I'll be talking about using the ACT method for setting limits with young children. Dr. Garry Landreth developed the ACT method as a strategy for child centered play therapy. So, although counselors have been using this technique for a while, parents can also apply the ACT to set limits in a way that supports their relationship with their child and also supports their child's growth. In the ACT, A stands for acknowledge the feeling or want of the child. C, communicate the limit. T, target choices. So let's break that down a little bit. Acknowledge the child's feeling. Many of us may not have been taught the value of or even how to express our emotions. So this step might feel really tricky. Or if there are certain feelings that you tend to avoid or that bring up a lot of discomfort when you have to deal with them in your own life, it can be really challenging to acknowledge that emotion in your child. Doctors John and Julie Gottman talk about this as meta emotion, or our feelings about our feelings. The significant adults in a child's life, often a parent or caregiver or teacher, are like coaches who help us to learn about our feelings and how we can respond to them. Usually, there are feelings that are accepted and validated and encouraged, and others that unfortunately are rejected, invalidated, or discouraged. There's a lot more I could say here, but for today's focus, let's keep moving. We want to reflect our child's feelings to show that we understand and we accept their feelings and needs. It's okay to feel all of our feelings. We accept all feelings, desires, wishes, not all behaviors, because our feelings are telling us something important. So we need to learn to listen to them. Our kids benefit from this part of the strategy too, because they learn to identify, communicate, and understand their own emotional world. Dr. Dan Siegel highlights the neuroscience of this skill in his model and calls this naming it to tame it. Knowing and understanding our internal world helps us to seek out ways of getting our needs met. And that ultimately helps an emotional experience feel a little bit less intense and more within our ability to manage in a way that's comfortable and effective for us. Feelings don't last forever, and they also don't define who we are. So, naming a feeling in the moment can help us to feel some sense of control over what we then do next, especially when that feeling is witnessed by someone that we feel safe with. So, when we acknowledge a feeling or a want, try to really connect with your child's emotional world. Look into their eyes. Dan Siegel calls this connecting to redirect. Connection has to come first before we can move forward. That might sound like, you seem really sad, or you feel really mad at me right now. As a parent, there's plenty of times when I failed at this first part of the strategy. Genuinely connecting with your child's emotional world at first might feel silly or maybe uncomfortable or even sometimes scary. Usually, those feelings come when we're so caught up in our own emotional experience that it can be hard to see our child's feelings and wants with clarity. But we are the adults, and our child needs our help to learn about their feelings and how they can navigate them in ways that will work for them. Neuroscience talks about co-regulation and the importance of grown-ups in a child's life who can help to turn down the heat on those big feelings through skills like the one we're talking about today. C, communicate the limit. This one is a little more straightforward because this is our opportunity to tell our child about the boundary that is needed or the behavior that's not okay. What's unique about how Garry Landreth talked about this part of limit setting was his focus on the action. So be consistent with the limits you have set. In most cases, limits should be total limits, not conditional. So limits like you may take a little piece or you may throw that lightly can be really confusing for a child because they're ultimately pretty subjective. What's light or little to me might not be what's light or little to my child. So we want to reinforce our child's ability to act responsibly by being clear and being concise with what our limit is. It's funny because this step can be challenging when we don't have a good idea for what our consistent and total limits are. Talking with kids forces us to boil down our expectations to a few words or a short phrase for how things work in a setting, a situation, or maybe within our family. I can recall feeling really flustered trying to communicate a limit in a clear way when it was something that maybe I hadn't totally considered my stance for what was acceptable or not. And our kids will absolutely test our limits when they're in new situations. It's how they learn about the world. So be patient with them, be kind to yourself, because it might be new for both of you. Sometimes the limit may come first. For example, in urgent situations where we need to respond to ensure safety for our child or someone else, in those cases, we might start with the limit and then follow up with a full ACT. The last step, target acceptable alternatives. This returns responsibility to the child for their choice of behavior. It also helps the child to learn self control and self direction, and that all feelings are acceptable. This one can be challenging as a parent because if we really connect with our child's feelings and know what they can't do in a particular situation, we also need to have good options for alternative ways of expressing those feelings and getting their needs met. This can take some creativity on our part, and with practice, it will get easier. As an example, think about a situation where you're sitting with a little one on an airplane or a train and they start to kick the seat in front of you. Maybe they're nervous about this new experience, or they're curious about this new environment, or maybe they have energy they aren't sure where to direct in such a confined space. So we can communicate our limit for the kicking behavior by saying, I know you want to kick that. Other people's seats aren't for kicking. You can choose to pretend to kick it with your toy, or you can tap on my armrest instead. In some situations, you might need to do these 3 steps a few times. Stay calm, be patient, remembering the point of this whole process. Kids will test limits to learn about the world, and their brains are still developing, so they need help from us to learn how to manage those big feelings. In some cases, a child might also need a final choice on the matter. This is when the child can choose by their behavior to have an item placed off limits for a period of time, or for us to leave a particular situation or setting. Whatever happens will be the result of the child's choice. What's most important for us as the parent or caregiver in this situation is that it isn't a punishment or a rejection. So our tone and our behavior should reflect that. This teaches the child that their choices have consequences too. So, for example, you've chosen for our time at the playground to end today. So that's the ACT method of limit setting. Trying something new can be intimidating and may take time to adjust and figure out how it can work well for you. So even if you decide not to follow the step-by-step ACT process like we've outlined today, think about how you can apply the ideas behind this tool to work in your relationship and experience with your child. When my kids would act out and need a limit, the structure of the ACT was sometimes a helpful tool to remind myself of how I wanted to respond in the moment. It actually pointed me in a direction that matched who I wanted to be as a parent and towards things that would support my child's growth and development. I definitely don't get it perfect every time because parenting can be hard, but the 3 steps gives us the same opportunity to recognize how our feelings and behavior connect and that alternatives exist, even if we don't get it right the first time. I'll end with another quote from Garry Landreth that I really appreciate as a parent. What's most important may not be what you do, but what you do after what you did. We can recover from our mistakes too, and how we manage our mistakes matters. Thanks for joining me today.